I told you guys last night I've been doing a lot more reading more articles, more Substack articles, because I usually don't read articles much on Substack, but I'm trying to get better about that. And I presented one from you or to you a couple days ago that was about Chris Hedges has a Substack. So I was reading one of his articles or something from it. And Matt Taibbi, and it was actually Eric who told me about this article, posted an article recently on Substack that I think all of you should read this article. I'm not going to read the entire article, but there are a couple of passages here that I do want to highlight and I do want to discuss, because I think that when it comes to war in this country, I think a lot of Americans have been propagandized to believe that we are doing the greater good, that the United States is doing the right thing by getting involved. And I remember buying into that philosophy, especially after, September 11th. I remember buying into that, thinking like, we're catching the bad guys. We're the good guys and we're going to go take the bad guys out. And, as I have grown, I've realized that that is not the case. So let me go ahead and show you this article here. Share my screen. So Matt Taibbi, if you want to find him on Substack, it's called TK News by Matt Taibbi. And the article that I'm talking about tonight is called Give War a Chance. Now, listen to this. This is really interesting. More and more, we're told outright war isn't just necessary and right, but the thing that will solve America's essential problems. And this is what I was talking about. The media, they convince us that we're doing the right thing, that this is how we're going to tackle these issues. Like, we are going in to save people, to help people, to protect people who are there. Most of the time, that's not true, obviously. So I'm going to go into this. So listen, there's certain points I want to point out in this article. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this section right about here. This is the one that really stood out. Most of us look back at September 11 and wish we'd tried to narrow the scope of the problem, not expand it in a grandiose ways, and make it the central fact of our lives of every person on the planet. We were told right away that September 11 meant so much more than a policing problem, that instead of a few nut jobs slipping through the net, bin Laden's Twin Tower attacks herald an inevitable and desirable final battle between new and old worlds. We're going through something similar now. Now, before I get into that part, I do want to chime in here and say the propaganda, and I have to be careful how I discuss this because of what I'm talking about, but the propaganda around that time, there was so much promotion about American pride and you should be proud to be an American and America's going to fight back after September 11th. There was a lot of that on TV. If it wasn't news, I saw commercials about it. People, of course, tried to make money off of it, capitalize off of it, selling t-shirts. There were mugs. It was ridiculous. And when you see something like that over and over again every day, if you're not careful, you can start to believe that we are doing the right thing and that America has to be the greatest country and that we are the good guys. And that is what was preached to us during that time. Now, I can't really speak about conflicts that happened before I was born, but I can talk about the ones that I experienced and what the media space was like during that time and the message that was coming across to a lot of people in this country. Matt Taibbi is telling you we're experiencing this again right now with the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. And I want to give you an example of people trying to make money off of this. Everywhere I go on social media, I see like a flag or a picture, or someone has it in their bio or their little headline, a Ukrainian flag, and the message, I stand with Ukraine. I am not here to say that people in Ukraine should be punished. I don't think anyone should be punished right now, but I am going to say that I think that the United States, Russia, and Ukraine, all three of them are at fault when it comes to this conflict. I'm not putting 100% of the blame on one country. I'm that person. But it is disturbing to me to see people making money off of it. That really bothers me, that irk my nerve. It really bothers me. And I'm seeing people do this. They got t-shirts, mugs, bumper stickers that you can buy. I went through something similar like this a couple of years ago here in Boston. Boston Marathon. For those who don't remember, a couple years ago, there was a Boston Marathon bombing here. I was here. And I remember that very well. What was kind of sad to see was all the companies that made money off of it. All the companies that made money off of the people who were injured, the t-shirts, the mugs, Boston Strong. It became a hashtag. And I always get concerned when some type of event or movement becomes a hashtag, because then it's profitable and these companies can make money off of it. It takes away from the seriousness of the event. It takes away from the people who were victims. And here we are again. Everywhere I look, hashtag I stand with Ukraine, buy this t-shirt, buy this mug. It's just another way that people are making profit off of it. And I don't like that. I think that's disgusting. So we're going through this again, just like we did with September 11th. So listen to what else he says here. We're going through something similar now. The pundit excitement over the final clash between democracy and autocracy, perhaps being at the hands, reminds me exactly of the open praying for signs of the apocalypse I once heard among the rapture ready flock of Pastor John Hagee in San Antonio. We saw a ton of this thinking after September 11. World domination advocates who'd been laughed out of meetings for years were taken seriously overnight. Rigid. They were suddenly in print and on air everywhere, bursting with plans for everyone. Such people always rush to the front of the debate in these moments, and they're always listened to. Until about 10 years later, when it quietly becomes okay to reflect on a question we probably should have pondered in the moment. Hey, are these people crazy? Why don't we do that? Why don't we do that even right now? This is another one of those situations I feel we're going to look back on years from now and say, oh, yeah, that probably wasn't a good idea. Maybe all of that warmongering, maybe all of those anti-Russia phrases and rhetoric that people are using, looking back on it, maybe that wasn't a good idea. Because I remember after September 11, the type of rhetoric that people were using in this country against Muslim people. Some of you in the chat, you might remember that too. I remember that. Now here we are years later. Some of those same people look back on it and they're like, oh, maybe that wasn't a good thing to do, a good thing to say. This is what happens when you let mainstream media propagandize you to the point where you start to believe that the quote unquote identified enemy is someone you should hate. And not only should you just hate the country, but you should also hate the people in that country. It's something I want people to pay close attention to because I'm seeing it happen, and not just on social media. I want us to be really careful that we don't get back to that point again that we were back then in September, where people were hating Muslim people. I hope we don't get to that point again in this country where people start to feel that way towards people who are Russian. Because some of the things that I've heard, it's appalling. It's appalling. And why do they think it's okay to say it? Because mainstream media is telling them it's okay. If you turn on the news and you hear Rachel Maddow, you hear Brian Stelter, all of these pundits on CNN and MSNBC sit up there and use that same type of rhetoric. You saw last night, I showed you Jen Psaki in a 1 minute, 6-second video clip had blamed Russia 5 times without directly saying, I blame Russia. The more you watch it, if you're not informed and you don't know what's really going on, the easier it is for you to be pro-war and to advocate for it and to say, yes, go take them out, which I heard that during September 11 too. After that, the more you're going to advocate for it and the more you're going to hate those people. So we have to be very careful. Let's go back in. At the outset of the Ukraine invasion, American talking heads with near unanimity insisted there be no calls for direct military involvement. We were told even the most hawkish elements in the West just wanted to supply Ukraine with weapons and give them a chance to fight back against a brutal invader. That stance held for less than a few weeks. Messaging moved more toward open calls for war in distinct phases. The first came via a flood of stories about how the invasion had revitalized or restored faith in the American project. To some, Putin's march into Ukraine, whatever else it might mean, first and foremost, validated every dumb foreign policy idea America ever had. I want to skip down to this part here. Ukraine war ushers in new era for U.S. abroad. Now, this is from March 12, the New York Times. Matt goes on to say this was an orgy of such neoliberal crowing about Ukraine righting past wrongs. The post-September 11 war on terror period of American hubris and decline is now behind us, declared Obama's former Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, echoing baseball star George Brett's famous quote about hemorrhage surgery in the 1980 World Series. My pain is all behind me now. Let's jump down to this part right here. Former Obama HUD official Brandon Friedman, author of a book called No Kidding, The War I Always Wanted, responded to reports of mass civilian casualties in the city of Bucha by conceding that, yes, America has a history of killing civilians too, but never in ways that look this bad. No cities during the Iraq invasion were ever made to look like Mariupol, Bucha, or other heavily damaged places in Ukraine, which I'm guessing means he never visited Fallujah. He added that he simply did not believe the statistics about civilian deaths compiled by the widely cited group Iraq Body Count because the organization is currently promoting a Michael Tracy tweet. Former U.S. soldier and writer Matt Gallagher said that while, yes, American killed civilians, these attacks weren't systemic or conducted on a mass scale. Look at how easily and how calmly they're talking about civilians being killed. Yeah, a couple people died, a couple of kids, women and children died that weren't fighting, that weren't involved with the war. But, I mean, it's not like it was done on a mass scale or something. That's actually not true. We've seen reports, we've seen documents that show that this was done on a mass scale. We've seen that a lot of times you have like 80%, I have to go back and check the number, 80% of civilians killed. You don't consider that to be on a mass scale? Carr says, what the? I know, right? This is terrible. Isn't this crazy? They talk about it so casually, as if this isn't a big deal, that innocent people are dying. Let's go back in. He quickly deleted the comment. So there you go. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. There's another part I want to highlight here. Let me go down. The notion that someone else's insanity could cure your own ought to be limited to the thinking of people who live in padded rooms. Sadly, it isn't. Even before Putin invaded Ukraine, we saw open longing for a chance to give leadership. This was the thesis of Bret Stephens' article, Bring Back the Free World, way back on January 25th. Stephens decried an America so obsessed with its own sins that it was helping the autocracies of the world make democracy seem divided, tired, and corrupt. What was needed, he wrote, was a restoration of the concept of the free world, a way to bring back its clarifying power and moral force. Clarifying power. Let me go down here. There's another part I wanted to show you as well. As time passes, it seems there's less and less of a chance of negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine in a way that might keeping the problem localized, because that will leave the global clash unresolved. Analysts and think tankers have already moved past Ukraine in their minds to a future reorganization of Earth. Here's a quote here. Russia's war against Ukraine will end with the breakup of the Russian Federation. It will be replaced by small, demilitarized, and powerless republics with neutrality written into their constitutions. So here's another part I want to highlight as well. For most of the 90s, living in Russia, I found myself gaining an appreciation for America. I thought, as messed up as our country is, at least you can't openly pay bribes in court, and people aren't often boiled alive when hot water pipes burst under sidewalks. Then I went home not long after September 11th, and watching George Bush, soon found myself missing Russia, thinking at least Boris Yeltsin was too busy drinking and stealing to try to conquer the planet. Now the worst of both worlds are on a collision course. People like Igor Strelkov are shouting the Russian equivalent of "Bring it on" to the free worlders. And armchair warriors like Robert Kagan, I mentioned him the other night, by the way, are shouting their own provocations back. God save us from the people who dream big without brains to match. But basically, the point he's making here is how easily Americans can just advocate for war. That's why the name of the article is Give War a Chance. People really do believe it will solve America's problems. That's Robert Kagan, by the way. This guy right here. JP said Chris Hedges says we have not had any real politicians in the United States since the 30s and 40s. Wow. Yeah, I remember hearing him say that. I think that was before corporate money got into elections. I'll have to double check, but I think that was the last time we had elections in this country and corporate money was not involved. Rebecca says, and service members' attitude is, I was just doing as I was told, and you should too. Yes, let's talk about that. It happens. It happens. That's what they're told, right? That's what they're told to believe. Yes, it may be hard for you to see innocent people die, but this is your job. You're just doing your job. At the end of the day, don't beat yourself up about it. Try saying that to some of the veterans in the United States that have been in those conflicts abroad. Megan said, how are people going to cry out about civilians dying now, but are silent when 90% of US drone strikes kill civilians? Exactly. 100%. How are people going to cry about it now? Sebastian said, if they want war so much, why can't they volunteer themselves in the front lines? Oh, wait. They want someone else to do the dirty work. Loner Weirdo says Madeleine Albright's line of hundreds of thousands of dead Iraqi kids being worth it. Yes, I remember that. I mentioned that too when she passed away, and they were trying to praise her on Twitter and they were trying to praise her on CNN and MSNBC. And I was like, why are you praising this woman? So I ran some clips to show people some of the things that she said. She didn't care. She didn't care about those kids in Iraq. Please. JP said if Ralph Nader was a president, we would have a better country today. Interesting, JP. Interesting. Well, we know what they did with Ralph Nader. You know, they pushed him out quickly. Like, oh, you can't be here. You cannot stay here if you're going to speak out against us. Unfortunately, that's how it works. Tool Droid said Albright was a ghastly woman, one of the worst, yet celebrated by mainstream Dems. Disgusting. Woof. Yeah, she was pretty brutal. Pretty brutal.